Welcome to Public Health on Call, a podcast from the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, where we bring evidence, experience, and perspective to make sense of today's leading health challenges. If you have questions or ideas for us, please send an email to publichealthquestion@jhu.edu. That's publichealthquestion@jhu.edu for future podcast episodes.
Hey listeners, it's Lindsay Smith Rogers. Today, the January 2026 sewage spill in the Potomac River. Environmental scientist Natalie Exum returns to the podcast to talk about one of the largest sewage spills in history, how the impacts may continue long into the spring and summer, and the larger public health story of aging infrastructure and how we live alongside these fragile bodies of water. Let's listen. Natalie Exum, welcome back to Public Health on Call. How are you?
Great. Good to be with you, Lindsay.
So today we are talking about a sewage spill in the Potomac River. So first of all, just so our audience remembers who you are, tell us a little bit about you and what you do.
Yeah. Happy to share that. I am an assistant professor here in the Department of Environmental Health and Engineering, and I have both training in environmental engineering and so hydrology and how water moves through the environment, but my focus really is on public health outcomes and waterborne infections and how pathogenic material in our environment can get into us and get us sick. And so my real passion is combining those two areas.
We are going to talk about all of that today. Could you first start out by telling us where this sewage spill was located and what happened?
Yeah, so this is the Potomac River. It borders between Maryland, Virginia, and D.C. So this is basically three separate state and local governments. And it was right below, if you know the area, the 495 bridge. So lots of traffic going through there, very densely populated, mostly residential, very little industrial sites area. And so when we think about what was actually in that spill, we're talking a lot of human sewage.
And so tell us about the spill and who found it? What happened?
Yeah, so this was one of the largest sewage spills in U.S. history. It started before the big freeze. So if everyone remembers, it got very, very cold right around mid-January, but this started before then. The story of it starting is really just collapsing aging infrastructure. This was an interceptor, a major interceptor, which brought sewage over from Virginia, crossed under the Potomac, was collecting sewage also from Maryland. So this was just a major site of collection, which was known to be aging. There had been about $200 million of an investment allocated to start fixing it, but the pipe just broke too soon. What ended up happening is it collapsed, it broke, boulders got into it. And so it is making both the stoppage of the sewage flowing very challenging because now they have to remove those boulders. But there's just been so much sewage that has gone into the Potomac, but they're trying to kind of pump it into this empty canal, the C&O Canal that goes down that area to even just have a holding spot for it that they're now pumping back into the wastewater system. So a long explanation there, but this is very challenging work and also in frigid temperatures.
How much sewage are we talking about here?
Yeah, we're talking probably 300 million gallons. This is enormous, and there's still kind of ongoing releases. Just over the Super Bowl Sunday weekend, we saw almost maybe up to another 1 million gallons because of the cold temperatures where these pumps that are supposed to be pumping the water from the canal were locked up. They just froze up. So this is not over, and these releases are still going on, and I just think that's important that everybody knows that this is still off limits to have any contact with this water.
And so what happens when you have a sewage spill of this size? It's going into a body of water that's in a very densely populated area. How do you even begin to address this kind of accident?
Yeah. Well, from the public health perspective, and one of the main things you should think about first is where are we getting our drinking water? And is this going to get millions of people sick if they're drinking the water? And thankfully, this occurred right below where DC Water gets its intake for the public drinking water system for Washington, D.C. So that was fortunate. The other piece of this is, there's the ecological concerns, but more short-term are the public health concerns. And yes, absolutely, it smells. Absolutely. The challenge is it's happening at such a cold period of time that this is also getting locked up in the ice. And so where we always say environmental health, the solution to pollution is dilution. Well, the river is very low right now. There is very little contribution from other flows. And so basically, as the Potomac River keeper coined it, this is a real gut punch to the river. So you just have basically sewage that's locked in there, that's sitting there. And we really haven't studied this very well to understand what is the slow release of pathogenic material going to do both to health and to the environment.
What's in sewage water? What are we concerned about?
We are concerned about a lot of things. I mentioned that industrial pollution is always of greatest concern because there's a lot of chemicals in there that can be known to be hazardous and harmful potentially. Hopefully not because it's put into the sewer, but it can be more complicated. This area, what we're talking about, as I was very highly populated, it's mostly human sewage, right? Household sewage. So any kind of cleaner or any kind of pharmaceutical or any drugs people are on, this stuff used to go down to the wastewater treatment plant and go through many, many different steps and processes to break down and take out of whatever we put back into the river down below the Blue Plains treatment plant. But all that's just going directly into the river now. The immediate concern really is the infectious material that's coming out of all of us. And so some of the sampling that's been done by the University of Maryland has found that the E. coli levels are about 3,000 times higher than the recreational standard is right now. They've also found methylene-resistant Staph aureus, which can be very challenging infection, and then just also Staph aureus as well. They found Staph aureus at 1/3 of these sites that they have taken, not just right where the spill happened, but further down the river. And then there's lots of antibiotic-resistant kind of other types of bacteria in there as well. Those are the ones that I, from a public health perspective, would be most concerned about. And, the thing about this is the river is kind of acting like a big refrigerator for the bacteria right now. And where if it were hot, these things would, they'd be dying off. But they're kind of just in their cold state. And once it warms up, they're going to be ready to inflict harm.
And you mentioned that this is an ongoing situation. So they stopped the initial outpouring of sewage, but then you've had these other problems popping up. How do you address these piecemeal?
Yeah, so now people are on the scene. And so, there's a little bit more hands-on to address these things as they come up. But the real concern was just the gigantic geyser of poop that was flowing for that long. And so the second best solution was putting it in the C&O Canal to make sure it wasn't getting out into the environment. But I think the real message here is ongoing vigilance, because due to these boulders now that they've discovered, it's going to take another 4 to 6 weeks to actually fix this interceptor, this large, gigantic pipe bringing sewage down to the wastewater treatment plant. And so vigilance is required, and we really need everyone's hands on deck to make sure that the river is going to be okay.
And that was going to be my next question. There's a lot of different parties that have to be involved with an accident like this. People are looking at the problem from different angles, and then someone's got to pay for it. Who's at the table? Who's a first responder, and then who's monitoring the problem?
DC Water, and they are on the scene for this. And the people that foot the bill are the people on DC Water's bill, right? So this is very much a nightmare of when you're trying to manage a utility, is just the huge costs that go into fixing the breaks that occur. And it takes up a big part of your budget, but that is who is paying for this. And those are the crews that are on the scene there. So there's DC Water that's managing it. But because this is, Maryland and Virginia and DC, the big part of this is also the monitoring to see what's in the water. And so it's a very challenging coordination effort right now of who is in charge of taking those samples, of reporting them out, and making sure that this is a coordinated response. And so the Potomac River keepers have really been on the scene doing this. They were the ones collecting the samples, as earliest as they could. They sent those over to a laboratory at the University of Maryland and are getting these samples done. DC Water is also doing that, but their main responsibility is to make sure the infrastructure is up and running, not to be taking on these, other kind of tasks that could be done by other agencies. We have had recreational use advisories come in now from Montgomery County and from Prince George's County. And, there's been some shellfish advisories as well because, concerns from people eating shellfish downstream of this. But there's been no official language from real public health entities to say the water is dangerous, don't go into it. It's also cold, so maybe they're assuming no one's going into it. we have public health really has this down for, say summer recreational contamination of our bodies of water that people go into and they're regularly monitored. But this is kind of off season. And so we haven't really seen that foot forward from the public health agencies that we would have liked to.
You mentioned that the cleanup of all of this is really complicated. What does that look like?
So this is going to last longer than it normally occurs because of the temperatures and this kind of, as I was saying, slow release of this pathogenic water once we thaw out here on the East Coast. And so, again, we're going to just hope that it gets diluted and it gets washed down the river and the river is able to recover. But the key here is public trust. And how do you restore people's trust in the quality of the river? Because it's been completely taken away at this point. Crew teams, think about all the crew teams around the area that are rowing on this river. I had kayakers reach out to me yesterday to say, what's going on? Can we get out there? What can I do to help? Because I care and love about this river. And so there's a lot of recreational use. I mean, if we think back to even just over the summer, right, we had our HHS secretary swimming in one of the tributaries into this river. And there's a lot of spots on the Potomac River where people get in. And now my greatest concern is that this is going to kind of go under the radar because it's happened in January. And now here we are in May and it's hot and we want to, take our kids down to the river. But we need monitoring. We need daily monitoring and a dashboard so people can go on there and see it, wherever these monitoring sites are, to have confidence. And we need public funds to be able to do that because that's a very expensive effort.
Yeah. Could this have been prevented?
I hesitate to say that it could have been prevented because our aging infrastructure in the United States means we are always vulnerable to something like this happening. And it's very hard to know which pipe under the ground is most susceptible to breaking at any point in time. And so, I think the details of this one case we'll learn about in months to come. But in general, I think it's very hard to prevent these.
What do you see happening in the next few months? Are there efforts to create that public communication that needs to happen, that this spill, it needs time to dilute? Is there a sense of when this might happen, maybe after a few heavy rainfalls in the spring as things melt? What's the time frame here we're looking at?
It really matters what kind of rain we get, and hopefully spring is coming soon. And even still, I think we have not had this massive amount of sewage dumped into a river where it's been able to kind of sit and settle. And because there's not much precipitation coming into the river right now, there's been a lot of settling happening. And so this is going to get kind of locked up in sediments as well on the bottom of the river. And so you could go in and dip your Nalgene bottle and cap it and send it off to a laboratory, and they could analyze it and find that the levels of E. coli are below what we deem are recreationally safe. But what does that mean when you step into that, the bottom of the river and you kick up those soils? Your 2-year-old, we all know how easily this kind of water gets in their mouth when they're playing in it, right? That's where my public health concerns are coming from.
Last thoughts on this. This is a big situation. It's an evolving situation for public health. What do our listeners need to know about this?
This is the drumbeat of my work, which is that the infrastructure that we cannot see is keeping us healthy and safe in ways that we don't even really understand. For the people listening in the region who are concerned about the river, I think that active engagement on this is going to be needed into the spring and the summer, especially if you're a paddler or you go and recreate on the river. I think people need to speak up, maybe be asking your council members what's going on with this, so that if you do really, I think we need to show that the environmental and the public health parts of this just can't be just washed away, right? We need to really keep this at the forefront of our minds. One of the last thoughts to leave your listeners with is that we in the United States, through the Clean Water Act, have done such a good job of cleaning up our water bodies and our rivers, such that you can have a big river, the Potomac River, right next to a major city that is so clean that you can take your boat or you can take your fishing rod and you can take your kids and go into it and believe that you're not going to get sick. I think what this really reveals is how vulnerable we are to those clean rivers becoming, cesspools again. Because if this were 100 years ago, these areas would be cesspools, right? The Gowanus Canal is a great example. It's a complete cesspool. It's being cleaned up now, right? And so we're able to recreate and be live near our water bodies in ways that I think today we take for granted. But it was a lot of work that got us to this point. And I think this sewage spill really shows that in the break of one pipe, that can all be gone and taken away.
Natalie Exum, thank you so much for coming back to Public Health on Call.
Always a pleasure, Lindsay. Thanks.
Public Health on Call is a podcast from the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, produced by Joshua Sharfstein, Lindsay Smith Rogers, Stephanie Desmond, and Rachel Walsh. Audio production by Michael Bonfils, Matthew Martin, and Philip Porter, with support from J.B. Arbogast, Spencer Greer, and Chip Hickey. Distribution and social media by Rachel Walsh, with support from Nick Moran and Brianna Iacovelli. Follow us on Instagram and Blue Sky at Public Health Pod for more public health takes and special content. If you have questions or ideas for us, please send an email to publichealthquestion@jhu.edu. That's publichealthquestion@jhu.edu for future podcast episodes. Thank you for listening.